19 years, 1 month, and 8 days before being stabbed while acting on the set of a vampire movie, Terrence, 25, had, over the course of the previous 2.5 months, run through a series of very short duration jobs, none of which involved performing in a movie. Hi, I'm Neil A. Yeager, and today I'm reading from my novel, Non-Hollywood. Just thought I'd mention that the song you hear at the beginning and the end of these videos is by the band Casual Rebels. Now, interesting thing here is that the songs mentioned in my book Political Music Club are also by Casual Rebels. If you'd like to hear more, Casual Rebels are on Spotify and Apple and Google. Check them out. This is Chapter 39, Day Jobs for Creative Types. An older man he knew from acting class had gotten him a few days' work with a company that built sets. And even though his job was just as an extra hand to lift and carry things, his utter incompetence at the construction trade was so obvious that it was unlikely that he would ever be invited back. He had actually heard some of the guys calling him Pretty Boy behind his back. He was given a one-day tryout at a chicken grill, which hadn't worked out primarily because it had taken him several minutes to open a giant can of tomatoes using, and he felt that this had been sabotaged by the guy currently working there, a wobbly can opener that barely worked. He had worked one night at a dive bar, and Melanie had insisted that he not return to that one, as during that one night, a young man who Terrence suspected to be a gang member had threatened to disembowel him with a pool cue. The longest gig he had worked was passing out flyers on the Santa Monica Pier. He had been told that he would be paid weekly and in cash, but after 3 weeks of not being paid and being dodged by the man who was supposed to be paying him, Terrence had stopped making the drive to Santa Monica. So, it wasn't really a surprise when Melanie, 24, had told him that she would start looking for a job. Melanie had a business administration degree. Nor was it any great surprise when a few weeks later she had announced that she had landed an office job with an okay salary and, more importantly for their situation, a good insurance package. And so it was that Terrence became a stay-at-home dad. Obviously, he and Melanie both realized that something would have to be worked out in order for Terrence to go to auditions. Luckily, they knew another couple about their age who had small kids and could probably step in during that event. Of course, Terrence hadn't been called in for an audition since the religious film almost 3 months ago, so it didn't seem to be anything worth worrying too much about. Another benefit of Melanie working was that Terrence would be able to go back to his acting class. He had stopped attending as they didn't have the money, but Melanie insisted that she would now pay for them, as they both felt that the networking opportunities alone were well worth the cost. She also signed him up for a class on auditioning for commercials, which Terrence had previously thought out of the question, but he did know from his books on the acting business, which had also all been purchased by Melanie, that commercials could be a good source of income for an actor between film roles. They had been in LA for quite a while now, and Terrence could not understand why he didn't seem to be getting anywhere. He understood that it was a competitive business and all that, but it seemed odd to him that with the incredible amount of roles that he had submitted himself for, he so seldom even got called in for auditions. Surely there weren't that many actors around, were there? He figured he must be doing something wrong, yet felt sure that he was doing everything that the acting books had advised him to do. One day, as he was changing diapers, an idea occurred to him. He had always wondered how many submissions a producer would receive when they placed a casting notice in Dramalog. So he thought, why not place his own casting notice and see what happened? He had always noticed that there was a phone number for placing casting notices, so he picked up the phone and called that number. He hadn't really thought through what his ad would be, and the first question that the voice on the other end of the line had asked was the name of his production company. Terrence hung up. The next day, he and the baby went to the nearby P.O. Box rental place and paid for 1 month's service under the name of a production company which did not actually exist. He then composed his casting notice, being sure that one of the roles that he was pretending to cast was a role that would be perfect for himself, but also listing other roles so that the ad didn't look fake. He was also sure to set a submission deadline 2 weeks away. He then called and placed the ad without incident. A few days later, he checked the box, and it was already not only full, but so full that a slip was also included telling him to pick up more at the window. He took the submissions home and opened each one, removing the photos and resumes and placing them into piles. Each day, the piles grew and grew. It was actually quite shocking how tall the piles were getting. He set them up as an obstacle course for his daughter to crawl through, though he later abandoned that idea as he felt the stacks were getting high enough that they might actually hurt the baby if she knocked them over. So, then, over Melanie's protestations, he moved the stacks to the kitchen table. By the time the 2-week deadline had arrived, the headshots had basically swallowed up the table. What particularly amazed Terrence was the number of photos of young men who looked a hell of a lot like him. Now, where he had grown up, he had been the only guy around with his look, but here, on his kitchen table, were dozens whose pictures even their mothers would confuse, which wasn't even counting the hundreds of other guys who had submitted for his role and were very different physical types. This was just the guys who looked a lot like him. Looking at the photos on the table was like looking at a gigantic family reunion. Even after the deadline, the submissions kept coming in until finally his 1 month of box rental had expired and he closed the box. By that time, he had received nearly 2,000 photos. Now he understood.